Hey guys, Justin Scott here. Welcome to my Applying Rudiments to the Drum Set lesson. So applying rudiments to the drum set is obviously it's a really big deal. A lot of times people practice their rudiments, they develop the ability to play a bunch of different rudiments on their pad, and then they kind of wonder, how do I actually take these ideas and put them onto the kit? I've had a lot of students who can play a lot of rudiments really well, but they don't exactly know how to start using them on the drum set. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about my approach to applying rudiments to the kit and just kind of my overall way of organizing and categorizing rudiments. So I've never really liked the way that rudiments are presented to the world. It's always been a little bit strange to me. I understand why rudiments are taught the way that they are and the history of them, but I've always just thought it was a little weird. So I basically kind of reorganized and categorized rudiments for myself. I kind of decided what patterns were kind of essential for myself to practice, and kind of figured out my own way of modifying patterns to create the different rudiments that I want to play. And I'm not going to go into the whole process here, but I'm certainly not trying to change the way that other people work on rudiments. This is just something that I worked on for myself, and I found it helpful when I'm teaching people how to apply rudiments. But there are certain things that I just don't really love about, these kind of standard rudiments that we have. And sometimes I wonder, why are there certain rudiments on there that I almost never use? And then why are there so many like hybrid rudiments that I actually think are really useful and I use them all the time? And then weird things like, for instance, the paradiddle and the inverted paradiddle are the same pattern. They're just, you're starting in a different place inside of that pattern. So why is that considered two different rudiments? Or if I play left, right, left, left, right, right, that would be called a paradiddle diddle. But if I start that same exact pattern on the second note, now it's right, left, right, right, left, and it's called a six-stroke roll. And I think that's kind of weird. So the way I kind of think about rudiments is, what's the actual pattern, and then what's all the different ways I can, permutate the pattern, all the different starting places inside of it. And I just think it's a more efficient way to learn. So if a pattern like a paradiddle that has 4 notes, then there's 4 possible permutations or starting positions. And if it has 6 notes, then there's 6 possible places. And it's kind of amazing to me how many students I come across that know all these rudiments, but they've never even thought of working on the different permutations. It's because it's not taught a lot, I guess. But I found that, by permutating rudiments, working on each different starting position, you end up with a ton more vocabulary, a lot more ways to use those patterns. You can start with a basic rudiment, and you can build so many rudiments on top of it just by adding little modifications. So for example, if I take the single stroke roll, I'm going to play it as triplet. I'm just going to play right, left, left, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and if I simply add a flam to the first note, which is basically just dropping the stick before I pull it up, I've created the flam accent. Right flam, left, left flam, right, left. And so even though it's not a single stroke anymore, I think of the flam accent as being like a modified single stroke, because my hands are still technically playing right, left, left. The core pattern is still that. Another example would be like the 5-stroke roll. So if I play the same triplet pattern with single stroke, right, left, left, right, left, right, left. If I just double up those second and third note, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. So obviously that's not a single stroke anymore, but I just think of that as being a modified single, because I'm still technically just playing right, left, right, right, left. I'm just letting it play as a double. Alternating flams could also be considered a modified single stroke, so I'm just playing right, left, and then before I bring the stick up, I just let it play a flam. And then another way that you could modify a rudiment would be by rhythmically bending it. So just changing the distance between the different notes. So if I took right, left, and I fit it into a 6-note grouping, and I simply play the first 3 notes on beats 1, 2, and 3, and then I move that last note, the last left that I play, over to the 5th note position, and I leave the 4th and the 6th as rests. So I'd be playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I've got the Hihat rhythm. But if you look at the sticking, it's still just right, left. I never stopped playing singles. I just rhythmically bent the pattern. So this is kind of how my brain looks at rudiments, and it's fun to kind of explore rudiments in this way. I could basically start with single stroke, and then I could slowly start to bend it into something else like a Hihat. And then bend it back, and you can have fun kind of bending in and out from straight to a Hihat or whatever rhythm you want. So that's like an example of how I might modify single stroke. And then if you look at the double stroke, you know, if I play the double stroke and I start to rhythmically bend it, eventually you're playing like kind of a shuffle, like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. And then if you keep bending it, keep closing in the notes together, eventually you end up with, you know, alternating flams again. So you could also think of alternating flams as being a modified double stroke if you wanted, because I'm technically still playing right, left, right, left, right. And so I think it's fun to kind of see what rudiments can morph into other rudiments simply through like rhythmic bending. And then obviously like a rudiment like the flam tap could be considered a modification of a double stroke, because I start with just right, left, and then I'm just simply adding that flam at the beginning. So I just think of it as a modification. If we take the paradiddle as an example and we close the distance between the last note and the first note of the next paradiddle, so if I play right, left, left, but after that second right, I just close the distance, right, left, left. That becomes the flam accent again. So you could think of paradiddle as being a rhythmically bent flam accent. And then of course a reverse paradiddle, right, left, left. You add a flam to the beginning of that and you get the single flammed mill. And then if you start working on all the different permutations of it, move that flam to the E, like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And so with modifications and permutations, I can kind of create, you know, whatever rudiment I want. And so I just have these like core rudiments, core patterns that I focus on, which are mostly made up of patterns, you know, all built with singles and doubles. And then you just add modifications to them. So that's kind of how I like to explore rudiments. Another example would be a rudiment that, well, it's a sticking that I call the standard 3. I don't know what it's called, but just playing like right, left, right, left, or right, left, or playing right, left, right, left. That pattern, I've never known a specific name for it. I've always kind of wondered, why isn't that part of the standard rudiments? Because everybody plays a version of that all the time. It's one of the easiest patterns to use to connect other rudiments or patterns that you're playing. So I call it a standard 3. If you take that rudiment and you modify it in different ways, you can create other rudiments that are more commonly known. So if I play right, left, right, left, if I flam that first note, right flam, right, flam, right, left, you end up with the Swiss triplet. Right, or if I play left, right, left, same pattern, just a different permutation. And then if I double up that middle note, so I play that right in the middle of the triplet as a double. Left, right, left. And then if I add a flam to that first accented note, So it'd be left flam, right, right, left, left flam, right, right, left. You end up getting the Blushdas pattern, which is a really common pattern, used around the kit. So the Blushdas pattern's really popular. So, the way I got to it was I just started with left, right, left, left, right, doubled up that middle note and put a flam on the first note, and you end up with the Blushdas. And then, now that I've got the Blushdas pattern, it's kind of fun to make modifications to this. Like maybe I can create kind of a linear pattern with it. So the Blushdas rhythm is technically similar to like the Herta rhythm. I'm playing flam, right, right, left, one, da, da, da. So it's kind of like playing the first note in a group of 6, and then the third, fourth, and fifth note in the group of 6, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I can do that, I could technically fill in those spaces where I'm not playing a note with my hands with a kick. So that pattern would look like this. And then I started thinking, okay, well, if I can play that, what if I rhythmically bend that and I even out the spacing between all of the notes? So if I count it with a pad, we're playing the Blushdas, which is flam, right, right, left, flam, right, right, left, and then I'm adding the kick in between. So it's flam, kick, right, right, left, kick, flam, kick, right, right, left, kick. So it's a pattern of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then what I'm doing is I'm separating that flam. I'm spreading out the distance so that it's all even. So now it's going to be left kick, right, right, left kick, right, left kick, right, right, left kick, right, left kick, right, right, left kick, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So anyway, I like to kind of bend in and out of it. I'll kind of go from that Blushdas pattern with the kicks in between, which is in 6, and I'll kind of straighten out the pattern, even out the spacing between the notes, and then you end up with kind of a 7 pattern. And that kind of thing is really fun, that kind of like collapsing of rudiments or stretching them out. I find that is, like, I can explore that kind of topic for like hours and not get bored, because you're coming up with really unique patterns that way. It's kind of a fun way to develop linear patterns and modify rudiments. So once you can play the pattern in 6, and then you can play the pattern in 7, and then the idea is you just kind of go back and forth. You kind of blur between playing it as the 6 or the 7. And then you can, have a ton of fun just kind of moving it around the kit. So I love exploring that kind of thing. I spend so much of my time finding cool modifications of rudiments and then working on kind of bending them and finding, especially if you can turn it into like an odd grouping of notes, like a 7 or a 9. That stuff just sounds really cool. The phrasing of it sounds really interesting. And then figuring out how to play that in a different note rate would be kind of the next step. So I'd want to make sure that I could play it, when it's a flam and it's like a 6-note pattern, I'd want to be able to count different rates over it, and then I'd also want to be able to do that with the 7-note pattern. Get really comfortable with the 7-note pattern, and then being able to count note rates out loud over the top of it and make sure that my brain's capable of playing that pattern in different rates or subdivisions. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about rudiment application on the kit and some of the ways that I like to use rudiments to develop my coordination. So I'm going to start with just single stroke examples. Obviously, you can sit and work on singles, speeding up slowing down, adding accents, moving them around the kit. That's kind of what everybody does with singles, but it's kind of amazing all the things that you could play just using singles. If you limited yourself to just singles and forced yourself to just play everything using single stroke, you can come up with a lot of really good stuff. In fact, there's a lot of gigs, like, if I play a lot of like CCM gigs, which I do, I play every week, doing CCM. It's really simple music. If someone said, hey, you have to play every song using just single strokes, I could probably do it, and it would probably sound just fine. You can just sit and create so many things with single strokes. So I'll just kind of play with singles. I'll try to just only play single stroke and never stop playing and see if I can just groove and fill with only single strokes. So that's something that I actually do quite a bit. I'll kind of limit myself to a particular pattern or rudiment, see how many things I can create. Single strokes are super versatile. The thing that you have to really get comfortable with singles is adding the dynamic coordination, adding different accents, and then eventually you want to get comfortable with kind of a little bit of rhythmic bending where you can kind of change the spacing between the notes, get used to kind of swinging or shuffling the rhythm a little bit. But that's kind of a fun thing to try. If you've never done that, kind of give yourself that challenge of try to play a bunch of things without letting yourself stop the single stroke. Another good exercise to do if you haven't done it is work on playing through the grid with your bass drum underneath like a single stroke hi-hat pattern, playing 2 and 4 on the snare. If you've never practiced playing through different grids with your bass drum underneath it, I really highly recommend it. So, essentially just playing the number and then the E, then the and then the and get really comfortable with the bass drum landing with either your right or left hand. Spend a little time with that because you'll find where the weak points are, where the weak links are, and then you can kind of fix them. So I'll give you an example. I'm just going to play hi-hat as 16th notes, snare on 2 and 4, and I'll play the bass drum on some of the grid positions. I'll just take you through the partials of 2 and 3 of the 4-note grid. So just thinking of it as 16th notes, and I'll just play through all of those right now. So that's a great place to start, is just play kind of dynamically flat, make sure that everything's happening evenly. But eventually, in order to really make it start to sound and feel good, you need to start thinking about dynamic coordination. So the next thing I would do is try to add some dynamics in my hands that have to stay the same no matter what I play with my bass drum. So like an example of that, maybe I'm gonna accent just the uhs, just that 4th, 16th note. So my right hand is technically just playing little tap strokes, and my left hand is going to play 1 E and 2 E and That's where that up, the upstroke and the downstroke come in. So if we're thinking prep strokes, it's going to be 1 up and down, 1 up and down. And it's really weird, if you've never done this, to play like a bass drum on that upstroke, or to not emphasize where you're playing the kick with some sort of accent in your hands. But that's what's going to eventually make your grooves feel really good is if you can control the accents in your hands and keep it consistent, even if your bass drum's playing something totally different. So now I'll play through those same grid positions, but I'm going to keep the accent on the of my left hand. I spend a lot of my time actually practicing simple things like that because, you know, it's easy to kind of underestimate simple exercises. You get to the point where you can play some really complicated stuff around the kit, and then you look at the simple stuff and you think, oh, I can do that. Of course I can do that. I can play that really complicated thing. And you kind of just take it for granted, like, oh yeah, of course I can do that. And then you try it and you realize, actually there's little problems there. There's little things that are a little off, or every time I try to play the bass drum on E and play an accent there, it throws me off. So it's really good to go back to some of the basic stuff and make sure that it feels really comfortable, particularly when it comes to your dynamics. Another thing to focus on would be like rhythmically bending those single strokes. So instead of just playing everything straight, I'm going to work on bending from a straight rhythm to kind of a shuffled rhythm. And of course, you can rhythmically bend all the way to like the point where you're playing flams. So a good way to start would just be play really straight notes. And then I'm just going to slowly start to move into that gray area where they're not quite straight and they're not quite swung. And if you can get comfortable playing in that gray area, I highly recommend it because it can give your grooves, everything you play, a certain feel where it's kind of, it's like it's correct, but it's a little sloppy sounding, and it kind of, you know, gives your groove an interesting feel. And a lot of times when you hear drummers play stuff and you think, why does it sound a little different when he plays it than when I'm playing it? And it's because maybe he's just manipulating the space between the notes a little bit. So start by playing really straight. And then just slowly start to add some swing. Right, and then eventually I'm into like a triplet shuffle. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. If I keep bending it, eventually you end up with like a 16th note shuffle, like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4, 1, 2, right? And then eventually I kind of end up with just flams. And so when you're practicing like through your grid, or if you're practicing like randomized notation, like maybe the reading section of the book, The New Breed, something like that, I find it really useful to add some rhythmic bending in, because you'll take something that you can play pretty well, suddenly you have to play it with a little bit of a swing on it, and it adds some challenge, but it also makes it sound really interesting. So I'm going to play through a little bit of randomized notation with the bass drum, and I'm going to play it kind of swung, like an 8th note triplet kind of a swing. So I'm technically still thinking 16th notes, but it's like a swung 16th. Like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So technically that rhythm was just like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, but I changed it to a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And it's, you know, it's a slight difference, and you can decide how much swing to put on it, but it's a fantastic way to kind of change the way that your grooves feel. I used to listen to drummers when I was younger, and you know, you listen to them play, someone like maybe Steve Jordan or something, and you think, oh yeah, I could play that pattern, I can play that groove. I know, like on paper, I know what he's doing. If someone wrote it out on a board, I could go, yeah, I could play that. But when you're young, or when I was young at least, I wasn't listening to the little details. I wasn't really hearing the dynamics, the consistency, the dynamic coordination going on. I wasn't hearing the spacing between the notes, and the ability to consistently, if I pick a certain spacing between the notes and I pick a certain dynamic in the groove, to be able to consistently keep that going and play it the same way over and over again, that's super impressive. And so oftentimes when you hear drummers playing stuff and you think, oh, I can play that, are you really listening to all the little details like dynamics and spacing between the notes? Because when you start focusing on that stuff, you realize, okay, there's a lot to work on here that goes beyond just being able to technically play the notes written on the page. So now I'm going to play a groove as an example. This isn't based on singles. This is actually just a linear groove. And I'm going to play it straight, and then I'm going to start to rhythmically bend it until it's really swung kind of into a eighth note triplet or a triplet kind of a shuffle, and then eventually into almost like a 16th note kind of a shuffle. Just to give you an idea of how you can manipulate a groove and make it feel different depending on how much spacing you put between the notes. You could also play the first half of the pattern kind of straight, and then maybe the second half you kind of shuffle it up. And I love exploring this kind of concept. Oftentimes I'll just find some sort of rhythm that kind of sounds cool, make sure the foundation of it is nice, and then I'll slowly start to bend it. And it really creates some interesting sounding stuff. So I'll give you another example using just single strokes. So the whole time, obviously, I was just playing single strokes. So like my right hand was just basically playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and my left hand was playing 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. I never stopped playing singles. I just, found a cool orchestration, added a bass drum pattern, and then you start to rhythmically bend until you, find some spots that you really like. Really fun thing to work on, give that a try. Another exercise that I like to do is I'll play some sort of consistent dynamic pattern with my hands. So I'm going to play single strokes, and I'm going to accent every third note. So I'm playing 16th notes, so this is technically playing dotted 8th notes as accents. So on the snare, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And of course, because I'm accenting every third note in 16th notes in 4/4, it takes 3 full measures before I'm going to be back to playing on the 1 with that accent. So I'm just going to let that loop, and then I'm going to read random notation underneath with the bass drum. So this is the type of practice that you might do using a book like The New Breed or Syncopation. And the idea is I would need to start with the grid. I need to make sure that I can play all the grid positions, just playing the numbers on the bass drum, just playing the E's and the ands, or E and or whatever. Go through all the partials of the grid underneath something like this, get comfortable, and then eventually you use random notation. If you like this kind of randomized notation thing, which I love it, I use it all the time. This is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to test your ability with your coordination is to use some sort of randomized notation, because all it basically is, if you look at pages like the reading section from the book The New Breed, which is in the middle of the book, it's basically just randomized partials from the grid, all kind of mixed together. So it's as if someone's just kind of throwing these patterns at you and you have to play them in real time. So you don't really know how good you are at grid exercises until you do a reading exercise to see how you handle things in real time. So I'm going to be playing, something like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and that kind of thing on the bass drum while I'm playing 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a with the single strokes on the snare. And I'm just going to keep time over here. So I played through 4 bars of random notation on the bass drum, and of course I was playing technically 3 bars of notation on the snare. So the second time I played through it, the accents are happening in a different place. So it's worth, just kind of constantly going through something like that, because I'm learning to kind of separate what's happening with my hands with what I'm doing with my bass drum. And the idea is you'd start with like just playing through the grid underneath it, right? Just playing like quarter notes. And then make sure that I could play just on the E. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. This is just a stacked coordination exercise where, it's all, the foundation of it is just based on playing single strokes. I don't have to play anything fancy other than singles and just build my coordination with the most simple rudiment technically. So now I'm going to play the random notation as accents on the pads. I'm going to play all the 16th notes, but I'm going to play accents, in the same spots I was playing the bass drum in the previous exercise. So now it's going to be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and that kind of thing. And then underneath I'm going to pick a foot pattern. So if you want to, start with something simple, you might do something like a walk. So play like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. One way that I like to do it is I'll play like a songo rhythm with my feet. So I'm going to play 1, 2, and 3, 4, and then I try to play the accents over the top. And we'll see how this goes. We'll see if I can do it. That's a really fun one. Obviously, if you want, once you get comfortable, you could start to rhythmically bend that and create, some interesting sounds that way. But I love that kind of exercise. I do that kind of stuff constantly in my practice time. Another fun thing to do, if you're interested in kind of pushing yourself into a more challenging exercise, is I'll play the same songo rhythm with my feet, which is based on 16th notes. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and then I'm going to play 8th note triplet single strokes over the top. So it's technically like a polyrhythm. I have a 4 against 3 happening. So you really got to get comfortable with the 4 against 3 before you try this. But it sounds really cool, and obviously, you know, drummers that are playing, you know, Latin stuff, Afro-Cuban stuff, this is totally normal in that kind of music, and so this is nothing. But you know, when I started exploring this stuff, it was totally new. Really, really fun to mess with, though. So I'm playing 1 and 2 and 3 and with my hands, and then my feet are playing a songo rhythm in 16th. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and. So that kind of thing's really fun if you're interested in kind of polyrhythms and stuff. That's a great thing to explore a little bit. Another fun way to use singles is going to be to play them as like 16th triplet, and I'm going to try to make a groove with it. So I'm going to be thinking 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and. So I'm going to lead with my left hand, and I'm going to accent on 2 and 4. And then every other hit with my right hand, I'm going to hit the bell. And then you can obviously start playing through the grid with the bass drum underneath that to get comfortable. Or what I like to do is I'll play like the same bass drum pattern from like the Rosanna Shuffle, which would basically be. And I actually heard a story recently where Dennis Chambers talks about a time when Jeff Porcaro actually brought him up on stage and had him perform that song in front of everybody without telling him he was going to do that. And in the middle of the song, Dennis started playing like that kind of rhythm. I probably didn't play it just like Dennis did, but it's a really fun thing to mess with. You know, getting the bass drum involved and making some really cool grooves. But you technically never stop playing single stroke. And then if you want, obviously, you can start modifying that single stroke and adding some doubles in. So now I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm going to start with the left hand, and I'm just going to play this pattern. 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and. And then I'm just going to double up some of the notes. All right, now let's talk about the permutations of rudiments. So now I'm going to use paradiddles as an example. And everybody teaches paradiddles, and so there's tons of stuff to do with these. One thing I'll say is I really like using paradiddles as ways of building my coordination, like stacked coordination. So I think it's a good idea to know how to play each permutation of paradiddle in like a groove context. So obviously, you can just start by playing the pattern between like your hi-hat and snare, or a stack and a snare, and then you get comfortable playing bass drum patterns underneath using, you know, like the grid if you want to, or just making up patterns that you like. You spend enough time with each permutation of the paradiddle until eventually the idea is I like to basically play them each one time and make one big pattern with all 4 permutations. So you have like the standard paradiddle, and then inverted paradiddle, and then you have the reverse paradiddle, and then the last permutation would be like a, I guess, a reverse inverted paradiddle. And making sure that dynamically these stay the same even if I'm playing a bass drum pattern that doesn't match. I want to keep the dynamics right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play dotted 8th note on the bass drum, and then I'm going to play through each of these permutations, but I'm only going to play each one time. So I'm basically making one big pattern where I switch between all 4 permutations of the paradiddle while playing dotted 8th bass drum underneath. So obviously before you could do the dotted 8th underneath, you want to make sure you can move through the grid, maybe do some random notation, but this is just obviously for an example. So that's a, you know, kind of an interesting way of practicing it, because usually you're used to just kind of repeating one permutation of the pattern. But by combining them all into one exercise, you have to get really comfortable transitioning, and your brain has to get that much more comfortable with each permutation. A lot of drummers can play paradiddles and inverted paradiddles really well, and then like the 3rd and 4th permutation, like a reverse paradiddle or reverse inverted paradiddle, those feel really weird to play. But they're so useful. There's tons of ways to use those. Now I would do the same exercise, but I'm going to play the paradiddle between the kick and the snare, and then the right hand is going to play the dotted 8ths on the stack. And then lastly, another thing I like to do once I can play through something like that, I like to rhythmically bend it and obviously try to play it like a shuffle. And then eventually I can start to manipulate it in a different way. So first I'll try to kind of play it as a shuffle real quick. And then I find it really fun, now that I'm playing it technically as like the 1st and 3rd note of a shuffle, that middle note is now wide open. So I'm going to play my stack as the middle note between all those different paradiddles happening on the 1st and 3rd note of the triplet. So this is where it gets a little bit weird, but it's kind of fun to mess with. So essentially, if I just use the regular paradiddle, I'm playing paradiddle, paradiddle, right, left, right, right, left, left. And then in that middle triplet, and I'm going to try to do that, you know, connecting all 4 patterns. So when I play that middle triplet, more than likely I'll kind of accent every other note. So it'll be like, and you can get some really interesting sounding patterns this way. So let's give it a try. And then of course you can rhythmically bend it even further if you want. You could play it as like the first and fourth note of a 16th note if you think of it like that. So the shuffle would be like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. So instead of just playing that middle triplet, I could play like the E and. So anyway, you can have fun with it, move your hands around a little bit, but that's a way that you can take a rudiment that you've always played and worked on, and you have kind of a new way of exploring it. You just kind of rhythmically bend it, and then you can start inserting notes in between. You can create all kinds of cool linear patterns this way. So another example of that would be bending the paradiddle to maybe like the first two notes of a 3-note partial. So instead of playing it straight, like, I'm going to think of it as the first two notes of the triplet partial or a 3-note partial. So it'd be like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a right, left, right, right, left, left. And then that third note of the partial would be the kick. Sounds really interesting because you can still kind of hear the paradiddle in it, but obviously with the kick it makes it kind of a longer phrase. And then once you can do that, you could take that pattern and you could insert it into a different note rate. So for instance, I could play that same thing I just did, but instead of feeling it in triplet, I'm going to feel it as 16th notes. And I can actually maybe, you know, start it in a different place. So maybe I put the kick at the beginning of the pattern. So I think like kick, right, left, kick, right, right, kick, left, left. But I'm going to think in 16th note. So it'd be like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you got a really kind of interesting sounding rhythm because I've just bent the paradiddle, put a kick in between, and then I've changed the rate. So like here's an example of a fill I could play using that idea. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can apply rudiments around the kit. Hopefully I gave you some cool ideas that you can explore and gave you maybe a new perspective of how to categorize rudiments and modify rudiments. I really hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you guys next time.